I understand that you guys went through a weekend of very intense emotions for some of you. What we did, Mark and I, we started making a cartoon 2 years ago when we realized that as dads, we had some weird reactions to some stuff, some really weird, like panic attack kind of things, or huge anger bouts with our kids that were like, is that really me? And well, since we're pretty well schooled, I realized that there's a lot of stuff that's being passed on from generation to generation. You guys know that. So in order to deal with it, one way to deal with it, as my psychotherapist would tell us all, is to create art. That's a good way. It actually transforms whatever you're suffering from into something outside of you that's a beautiful construction, and it helps you deal with it. And it doesn't mean that it's therapeutic art. It means that you're telling a very intimate story. Now, the thing about storytelling is that the more it's anchored into something that's authentic, it doesn't have to be original. All stories have been told. But the more it's authentic, which means it's your take on it, your personal, your weird, like, troll-like perspective on it. And you're like, yeah, well, I feel weird because people don't usually react like that, and my friends didn't react like that, so maybe I'm wrong. That's the good stuff. When you get to that part where you're like, I'm so weird, why do I react like that? You're onto something. You're asking yourself good questions for storytelling as well. For other things, it's a good thing to ask good questions, but for storytelling, you're in the gold mine of the stories that you can tell. Whether it's you that you put yourself in the cartoon, Mark and I put ourselves in our cartoon, and we chose to deal with issues like fathers, grandfathers that went to war, and that came back different man, that came back traumatized, in a time where you had to play it like everything was okay. You're okay. You're okay. And then meanwhile, while you're pretending to be okay, things are boiling inside. And it comes out, it shoots out the sides, and it gets really nasty. That's why it's important to, at some point, go get help. These men did not get help because you were a sissy if you went to get help. And now we're receiving all that, and we're trying to be different, and we're like, yay, we're those modern dads that are like all like cuddly and nice, but it's not magic. Like, it doesn't change over one generation. My sister's an actress in Francophone Quebec, and she started writing poetry at some point. And she started writing personal poetry, which was really painful to read for me, because it's stories of her youth and things, some of her books I'm still not able to read. But she also wrote one about her grandfather who went to war, World War II. He's French. We're all from French descent because my parents are French. And he was a prisoner for 5 years. At some point, his back broke from having not enough calcium because they didn't feed him. Because he escaped too often, so they put him in a camp, which looked a lot like a concentration camp. And he was 85 pounds when he got out of there. He was a grown man, and he was 85 pounds. Just imagine that. So, of course, when he came back, living a normal life was impossible, so he moved to Canada and was back into survival mode, and he was okay. Okay. So it was fun to revisit that and try to understand that and understand what's happening to our kids and my sister by writing that book. It's called L'ADN des fusils, Guns DNA, and it's because trauma is being passed on genetically. There's little marks on your genes at some point, and they're being passed on to the next one and to the next generation, and sometimes that mark gets bigger. So that was our interest in making a book. That's the personal side. Now, when you want to tell that story, one thing you need is a bit of distance. Because if you're stuck with your story right here, it's going to be really hard not to go into every direction because that's how you feel. It's been in there forever, I mean, however long, It hasn't taken, you haven't had necessarily the distance to be like, yeah, that's what happened in my youth, and so I can look at it from a distance and be, yeah, of course, this is what happened. So you need to create that distance for yourself, either by making it happen to someone else. You have that character, Bob or Jane, and this is who it's happening to. Or if you're putting yourself in your cartoon, you need to understand, you need to find a way. Seriously, I don't know how. You need to find a way to get some distance and to understand what's happening exactly from your point of view at a certain time. Now, to tell a story, what I learned the most was from movies. The movies have to be efficient because usually there's a lot of money involved. You need to rent the gear and you need to pay the people, and so you need to really know what story you're telling. So, but the fun thing in cartooning or whatever other kind of storytelling is that you can take more time, you can go more places, you can tell crazier stories. Like it can be very poetic, it can be whatever you want it to be, it can be. But it involves drawing. And not everyone is necessarily born with the natural gift of drawing, but that doesn't matter. If you have a good story, it does not matter. Okay? There's a filmmaker teacher in South America that was always being haggled by her students like, you've got this great story, you should make a film about it. Make a film about it. Because she's been telling them, like, you don't need a great camera. You don't need the latest gear. You just need to use whatever you got and make a movie. And so finally she made her movie with a crappy camera. This one is way better than the one she had. And the movie was amazing. It didn't matter, it was pixelized or not pretty. A good story will take you places. And the drawing skills, sure, it's a good selling point if you can draw beautifully, but it's not an obligation. I don't know if anyone has seen the short film Rejected by Don Hertzfeld. If you want to write that down, Rejected, Don Hertzfeld. Donhertzfeld. Sorry, excuse my English. He made amazing animations, and they're stick figures. Every single one of them, he's using stick figures. Some of them are gut-wrenching. He made 3 shorts that turned into a long movie about alienation, and it's amazing. And his drawing skills are pretty close to 6-year-old. So you don't necessarily need that, and we'll go through that. So let me get back to this. Types of narratives. You can have a narrative that starts from point A that goes to point B in time and just goes straight. And that's an easy way to tell a story. That's usually how we tell it. If you're more convoluted, then you can start at point A. You can go back in time, you can go forward in time, you can go back to the present, and you can move along. But that's trickier because you really need to know what story are you telling and how you're telling it. But it can be more exciting because you can hold off on some stuff and then go back in the past and then discover stuff and be like, oh my God, what was Susie was thinking? So you can play with what you're telling if you're breaking up your timeline. And then there's poetic or abstract or experimental timelines where you do whatever the hell you want. And then you show things that are not necessarily cause and effect. Usually in the Hollywood movies that we've all been fed since birth, there's always a cause and effect, and people are happy at the end. You don't have to tell that story. It's been told millions of times. You can do a melodrama if you want, where people are living such big emotions that they look stupid, because we all do. Usually when we live big emotions, it's a little bit ridiculous, but it's intense and it's true, and it's not seen. We don't see that very often. So if you want to do it, feel free. Go into big emotions, go into whatever you want to show, and see what happens. Because a lot of storytelling is, first you experiment. You bring the stuff out, you don't judge. Don't judge at first. I mean, you've been already working on some stories, you've been telling stories in this class. Don't judge them. When you start working on them, when you get a little bit of distance from them, that's when you start judging, okay, what's efficient? What draws people in your story? What's compelling about your character, your characters? What's happening to them that you feel is the strongest thing? And then you move from there, and you start to build a story, and the story usually has a beginning, an end, and a middle, not necessarily in that order, as Jean-Luc Godard would say. I just like to plug names. But you can play with things, but it's usually easier when you start with easy things, a structure that's pretty solid, so you can, I think that the tighter your playing field is, the easier it is to get creative. So, one thing that we do is we come up with a lot of cliches in our stories. But since you guys have been talking about personal experience, chances are the cliches are gone. Okay? Because that's one thing. If you want to tell the story of a, I don't know, bank robbery, all the cliches are going to come out one after the other from all the movies that you've seen over and over, and that's the first thing that pops into your head. The good thing to do about those, you write them down, all your first ideas on what it's supposed to be, and then throw them in the garbage, and then you start over. Part of creation is also elimination. Okay? If you're telling a story about yourself, but you're still stuck with those stories behind at the back of your head, get rid of all the cliches. The thing that you feel like, yeah, it feels like it's the right thing to say, but it feels off. Write it down. You need to write it down. You need to take it out. Okay? It's the same for drawing. Your first drawings are going to be crap. Drawing is just something that the more you do it, the better you're at it. It's as easy as that. That's why people usually have the drawing skills at the time where they stopped drawing. Okay, I see some of you start to lean on the table, so I'll ask you guys questions. One thing that you want to do is, in one sentence, try to make a resume of, try to synthesize what your story is. And try to make it simple. Like, and I'm going to ask you to do it now, get pen and paper. One sentence, it's a story of a guy or girl, this happens, and then that happens because of it, and then this is the end. If you want to try doing that now.
And if you're feeling like the stress of finding the right thing, why don't you write down 3 different possibilities, right? Like, your first story you wrote for this class was your family migration story. Then you wrote the values story. And then you wrote the, came after values, was it race or gender? Then we also wrote the difficult, the trauma story. We wrote the resilience story. So just choose 2 or 3 of those and be like, number 1, this is a story about this. Number 2, and just, it's kind of like brainstorming also. You don't have to commit to any story right now in particular, but just the process.
I wrote 2 different ones. They both suck. It's okay. It doesn't matter. Things don't have to be perfect. If you're waiting for perfection, you won't do anything. Okay? And the cartoon we made, it's pretty good. Like, the story is compelling. You've read it. I'm pretty proud of it. But it's not perfect. If you're waiting for perfect, you won't do anything. That was my excuse for not doing stuff for most of my life. Then I had kids, and I realized, okay, it won't be perfect. Because if I'm trying to be a perfect dad, I'm going to suck. And so you start to accept that sometimes you need to do things. And then you correct things afterwards. And that's pretty much how cartooning works. And storytelling. Just let it out. You'll work on it later. It doesn't matter if it sucks. And it always will suck more than your sensitivities and your knowledge about stuff. You're all, well, like, you've seen movies, you've read books, you know, you've seen great stories. And of course your little story feel like, this is like cat piss. But hang on, hang in there. Okay, hang on. You need to tell 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories. And then eventually, it's just, the art of storytelling is not just telling one story. It's doing it over and over and over. And then eventually, they will get amazing. And the good stuff that you do now, it's going to be good even when you're older. Okay, whatever you succeed at, your good stuff's always going to be good. It's your crap stuff that's just going to get better and better with time because you'll be able to identify, oh, this is crap. But at first, you got to accept that it's not going to be perfect. So, Felix and I attend a seminar on trauma and start questioning their own mental health. That's one way to put it. I've just put the emphasis on the seminar in the beginning. Second one, Felix and Anya go to a canoe camping trip where all sorts of obstacles remind them about trauma. I don't have to tell the whole story. I just have to choose which part's important for me. What's the story I want to tell? Once you have that, and you're writing whatever on whatever device you're writing your story, put it on a sticky note and stick it somewhere. And when you don't know where you're going, read it. And when you read it, you'll be reminded, oh yeah, that's the story I want to tell. Because in the center of everything, the drawing, everything you do, the center of it is your story. And that one sentence is just a quick reminder, oh right, that's the story I want to tell. Do I need to draw the big castle with the dragon and everything around it that's going to take me 5 hours? Oh no, my story is not about that. And so you don't have to. So it makes you take better decisions afterwards. Easier decisions that are going to make your life easier. You're going to like the process more if you have that tool. Otherwise, you'll go in every direction and you'll be like, this sucks. So, in storytelling, in movies, and not just in movies, because that's straight from Aristotle's Poetics. Robert McKee, he's a writer and scriptwriter. He isolated 5 moments that are pretty much in every story. The inciting incident, you'll get this, okay? So you can refer to it later if you're like, what did he say? Like clown in front? Inciting incident, the progressive complications, the crisis, the climax, and the resolution. So the inciting incident is, you all read Felix and Anya, they go to a seminar. That's the first thing. And then from then, change starts to happen, and obstacles start to happen. So after that, progressive complications. Ideally, if you got so much distance that you're like, okay, I'm going to crap my thing so that at first he loses his shoe, and then later on, well, his girlfriend leaves him, and then later on, his whole family dies in a fire, and build like from small to really dramatic. Hello. That's up to you. That's up to you to decide how you go from, like if the most dramatic thing, I'm sorry if I'm mentioning anything that happened to anyone here, I don't want to make anyone feel like pain sticking out of their chest right now, but the main event of your story, it's good to have it either at the beginning. The best thing that you have, that's one thing I was told in script writing, the best thing that you have, you put in the beginning. Why? Because you want people to stick around. And if you got a good beginning, a good ending, and okay stuff happening in the middle, you might have a great story. Okay? It just got to be compelling. For it to be compelling, it has to be you. And not you that you want to show to everyone, ideally. The you that's the real you that's hidden behind all those layers of social adaptation. So it means a lot of trust in yourself that whatever's hiding behind is interesting and needs to be put down. And as I said, it can be happening to Bob or Jane or to you personally on the paper. So you can refer to that if you want when you're writing your story, just to check, do I have those things? Is it true or is it just a recipe? Do I have an inciting incident? Is there progressive complications? Is there a crisis where the shit hits the fan? Is there a climax where like they run off a cliff and fall and survive or die or whatever? And is there a resolution at the end? The images. Strong images carry meaning. So you can use images even to guide your story. You can say, well, I see that's what Ingmar Bergman, the great Swedish black and white filmmaker, he did some color. He had a vision, I saw like 3 women dressed in red and there's a coffin. And he would start his movie from that. And the advantage of doing that is images don't have the same, don't go through the same filter as words. When you use words, all your social construct comes in your way to the gravy. Because all your social construct is about showing the good side of you, being accepted, being liked. That's what you want. When you try to tell a story, you don't care about that stuff.
Because everyone's like that, and it's all surface, and it's all a bit fakeish. What's really behind those things is the stuff that you've been hiding all your life because you thought people would think you're weird. That's the interesting storytelling stuff. So in order to do that, sometimes drawings will help. One time I took my daughter to see a psychoanalyst because she was traumatized by something. And what she did, because she was in front, the psychoanalyst was in front of a 9-year-old who was getting bullied at school, she made her draw. She talked to her a bit, but just general stuff, and then she made her draw. And through the drawing, you don't lie. The way you hold your pen or your pencil, the way you scribble, just your lines, they're interesting. It doesn't matter if you do stick figures, they're interesting. They're interesting to me. Because I know that everyone here will move their hand in a way that's totally linked to what's happening behind their head in their subconscious. That's what it comes out. You don't protect yourself from a drawing. You don't think like, oh, I shouldn't draw this because they'll figure out who I am. We don't do that. So it's a good way to access that gravy stuff without being blocked by, I don't want to look this way or that way, which is our defenses against showing ourselves naked in front of people. So, drawing. You can tell your story using drawings. And I encourage you to do that. Draw 2 or 3 things that are your key moments in your story and see where that takes you.
Should we do a pause and let them
Yeah.
maybe
Give it a try.
brainstorm? What are some of the strong visual moments? Would you say that's the prompt?
Yeah, whatever. When you tell your story, usually there's an image that appears in your head. Draw that quickly. I'll give you 5 minutes. Comic book making is about visual ideas. Very often we won't say the things that we want to say in a story. Actually, the characters are really going to want to hide what they really want. So if you want to make a story, like the crafting of the story, if your character wants something, the last thing he wants is to tell people that what he wants is to be accepted within the group. He's actually going to try to hide that as much as possible. Until whatever crisis moment you have, when at some point he has to realize that he has to be true. Crises do that. I remember big crisis in my life where all of a sudden my dad was becoming himself. And I felt like he was not defending himself from everything and just being himself, like weak and vulnerable and sad and whatever he was. And I knew that I had a window of 3 hours to see my real dad. And then after that, that window would close and he would go back to just being his self-protective old man. So crises do that to people. And you know from personal experience, you've seen that. You've seen friends that break down and all of a sudden their real self comes out because they can't hold it in anymore. So a crisis will help your characters do that. So in your dialogues, make sure that prior to that, they're not like, I would like to be accepted by the group, because it's going to sound phony. It's going to be more like, I'm so cool, I don't need anyone. That hides something. Okay, so when you'll be writing the dialogue part, I'm skimming really quickly over this, but make sure that your synopsis and dialogue take into account the fact that people don't want to be seen for what they really want. We're shy about what we really want, in general. Drawing. Okay, drawing. So people are afraid that their drawings are ugly. That's a pretty common thing. Most people stop drawing when they're 9, and then from there on don't draw, and when they draw again, they're at the same point, if not below that 9-year-old point. It doesn't matter. Okay? They're still going to be expressive. I still find your drawings really cool, and I'm not even joking. They're interesting to me because I know drawing. And I know there's a difference between someone drawing like this, and then there's this, and then there's that, and this guy comes in, and someone doing this. Okay? It says a lot about what's happening to your characters when you do those small ones. It says a lot when you're all over the place. Okay? And it doesn't matter what you're actually drawing. Those things mean a lot. Okay? And then, the more you know how to draw, and that's what's probably scary, is that the more I know how to draw, the easier it is for me to hide those things. To hide the real me, just like we do with words. Because I use style to hide it.
So it takes actual effort for me to go back to what you guys have right now, which is sincerity in your drawing. Okay? So sincerity is fun when it's storytelling time, but it can be scary. So, I want you to be able to create simple figures that are easy to reproduce, whatever they are for whatever skill you have. I want you to make them involved in space, understand that they're in space and you need to show that space or not show that space in order to see something. And to give it a sort of a soundscape. Like use words, use onomatopoeia. How do you say that in English? Onomatopoeia? Onomatopoeia. So use those to enhance the story and give it a sense that you, like we can use sound in comic books in a way that's totally unrealistic. Like if I'm like dozing in my head and then pop, I come back, I can write pop. That sound does not exist in life. But everyone understood that if I write pop here, I'm back into reality. Okay, so that's another way that you can use it. So building character, that's the hardest part. When you draw something that's really neat and complex and hyper-realistic, you're saying one thing. You're saying this is the story of this guy. Not that guy, this guy that you're drawing. Okay? So it's a very, as a reader, when you look at those books, it's the story of a person named Bob, and that's only him. Because he looks like just him. But when you do a story about a guy that looks like this, that could be anyone. We all look at it and we're like, yeah, this is me. It's universal. You look at oh, these are upside down. When you look at power outlets, they look like faces, okay? As soon as you see something that looks remotely like a face, your brain is going to do this magic thing when it's going to go, it's someone. Okay, we're built like that. It's amazing. Cartoon help us use that. So it doesn't matter if it's realistic or simple. You're saying something, and you're saying something different. Okay, it's not that Schulz, the guy who drew Charlie Brown, we all know Charlie Brown. He was really good at drawing. So why did he choose to draw faces like this with the nose and the eyes and the wiggly thing? Why did he do so simple? Because everyone could connect to it. Why is Mickey Mouse so popular? Because he's the same thing. So simple, everyone identifies. So, when you're telling your story, it doesn't matter if your faces are simple, it's going to be easy for people to identify. You're gaining something from simplicity. Now, you might not want all your characters to look the same. So what you might want to do is change that circle into something else. Okay? So, for instance, in our personal cartoon, the character who's Mark, his head is pretty much shaped like the front of a mailbox. And then I put a nose, and then I put two eyes, and then he's got his hair like this, and then I make him like that. It looks nicer, but it doesn't matter. Okay? It doesn't matter. I'm not here to show off. He looks like that. My character, I'm a lima bean, because I got this beard going, and so it's easy, and I got my hipster hair, and my two eyes, and there. I'm a lima bean. So you can use simple shapes like that. I'm going to make you do it. Think about your character. What's he like? And try to imagine a face based on either a fruit, an object, anything. Okay? Try doing that now. There's the rest of the body. You can do stick figures in a simple way that's going to give your characters character. You can do a square for the body. Okay, instead of the line. If you're going to be doing stick figures, try doing a square. Try doing a rectangle, a triangle, reverse triangle. Use simple shapes. That way, when you think about that character, right, he's a reverse triangle. And then you start with that, and it makes your life easier afterwards. So you don't start with any gritty detail trying to make it look good. Try to make it simple at first. Okay, there's always time to come back, maybe, or not, to make it look better. But the important is, the people who are going to read it, they need to know that this guy is not the same as this guy. Okay? Because that's the main thing. If your characters all look the same, we won't know whose story you're telling. So you got to decide on major differences. Unless you're telling the story of twins or people that are very akin. But even then, you need to make subtle differences so people can differentiate. Right? You want to give that a try? Take that head that you put on and try to make a stick figure. Try to make an original stick figure. Stick figure, you can give out a little bit of information. Sometimes it's more than just the shape. Is their head low? Or are they like prancing around with their chest out? That makes a big difference in how we take information about your characters. Are they trying to show that they're self-confident by putting everything outwards? Are they really shy and everything is turned inwards? Even with a stick figure, you can show that. Now, okay, I'm going to ask you to stop. You can play with that later on if you want. So posture. If your stick figure is like that, it won't resonate the same way as if it's like that. Okay? You need to make those little differences. It's not about skill, it's about trying to show who your character is. It's always going back to the story. What's your story? Okay, read your line. Story of a guy or girl, and this is what happens to them. And you'll get the answer to how to draw in there. And since you've been telling really personal stories, that stuff is the most important. Okay, because you want people to not just understand the story, you want people to identify with your character. You want people to live things in your comic book. You want people to not just, oh yeah, I understand what that, no. You want people to feel it. In order to feel it, you don't need skill. And that, you need some skill, but you need the skill to understand that more than the skill to make the pre-picture. As I said, if you go to look at Don Hertzfeld's work, it is immensely compelling and stick figures. So it's really about the story you're telling and your understanding of posture. If at some point you don't know how to draw it, you don't know how to relate to it in terms of drawings, ask a friend to just stand there and look a certain way, or like if you're standing like this, there's one thing about axis. If you want to make it look real, someone who's like nonchalant, the hips go this way, the shoulders go the opposite way. Okay, so if you draw a trapezoid with this and that, see, all of a sudden, there's not much there, but there's someone that looks like something, and that's what you want. Okay, so these lines are super important when you're drawing because that's making a big difference between people who are not always like that. Okay, sometimes we're like that. If your shoulders are super high, that means high stress. Okay, if one shoulder is high, that means like old tension from trauma. I have this. I'm trying so hard not to show it, but it goes back up. And this one rolls inside. That's my signs. Try to find what the signs are for your character. Okay. Shading and light. Well, if you get fancy and you want to do a bit of shading and light, you got to decide first where your light is. And then from there, it's pretty easy that if the light's here, the shading is going to be here. There's stick figures, so it's a bit harder. But if I've got a square figure like that, oh, the light's here, so there's going to be some shading here, a little bit here. And sometimes it's fun to really shade our characters, not just because the light's there, because that's how they feel. In Felix and Anya, very often I took some liberties where,
I decided to make shading darker. I decided to make people in silhouette because I felt like there was a lot of darkness in there. And so, yeah, sure, it's the light, yeah.
In Felix and Anya, there's one scene that like was very memorable for me, and it was when the spotlight was on Felix
Yeah.
and everyone else was dark.
Yeah.
And to me, that read as like he was suddenly very aware of
Yeah.
what was himself, and then also very isolated.
Yeah.
Because everyone else was apart from him.
So that's one way to do things. It was not like that in the class where these guys were looking at the presentation. It's my decision to put them like that to show how they felt. So you can use light in your favor that way. Make everything dark around someone and then put them in the middle and you'll have an effect. And again, it doesn't require skill. You can still be your figure here and everything around them is dark. And you know what? Those lines sometimes are more expressive than your character. Don't try to stick to your character too much. Expression comes from very often, and most often, comes from what surrounds them. Okay? And draw angry. Draw sad. Try to put some of those emotions in the way that if you're angry, you go like, that says something. When I look at it, it's very powerful. More than how perfectly you draw their faces. A lot more. So don't be afraid to go for it in a very sincere way when you're drawn. Okay, settings. Do the minimum to evoke a place. I saw some of your drawings. Like everyone knows this is a house. It's going to be pretty universal. It's simple. It doesn't have to be much more than that. You can add some detail if that's important for your story. That's the simplest. I mean, you saw I can draw. You all saw the cartoon? I can draw like crazy. That's enough. That's enough for me to show to you now. Okay, so it's enough for you. Okay, it's going to tell a story of a sad person in front of their house, and the other guy's happy, and I don't know what to do. Okay, so try to put the buildings around them if needed. Okay, here's the rule. If you want your character to be in relation to where he's at, like let's say in that drawing, Felix and Anya are in the middle, there's a little bit of light around them, the rest is dark. But you can feel that there's people around them. Those people were important. If I had just drawn the two of them, we wouldn't have known where they are in relation to the world. But sometimes, when they have a conversation, when you talk to someone, it's like you're out of the world. There's just you and that person existing, the rest doesn't matter. Then you don't even need to draw a backdrop. It's like, it's free, non-drawing time, where you can just put someone's face when they say something, no background. So you can make those decisions based on your story, not based on your laziness, but laziness sometimes helps. It helps because we tend to think that what we do is not good enough and we should be doing more for it to be acceptable. It's not true. Okay? Just do enough. Shading and light.
Can we pause and
Yeah.
let people ask some questions?
Sure.
Maybe people
And I
have
was
questions
going
that help
to
you?
make you draw an apple.
An
An
apple?
apple. Or that stuff. Is there any question? Yeah, sorry, I'm shooting a lot of stuff. You guys okay? Yeah? Is there any questions?
They usually take a while to ask.
Yeah.
How do you make people from the same family? How do you show that they're
That they're in the same family?
yeah, like that this like yeah,
Um,
the same family.
It's funny because sometimes you don't, if you look at your parents, you have some stuff in common that you can use. But Anya and her mom don't look alike that much. Like, she's got a big beak for her nose, while Anya's got a smaller one. Anya's face is more like a reversed water drop. And her mom is a big square with the crazy hair that goes spiky on the end. And her mom is a square. So I think it's more how you put them together. They'll be closer if they're family. Like, I don't know you, I'm staying here. But if I was family, I'd be coming way, way too close. That's now feeling like a bit more uncomfortable. Okay? So your family will get close to you. That's how you show relationships is how much distance is there between your characters. Okay, are they shaking hands like this? Or are they yelling at each other in each other's faces? That's family. Sometimes. Is there any other questions? Questions are fun. Come on. No?
Archie?
So, like, for those of us who like have like more skill in drawing, like, what you like suggest in terms of like drawing like how
What you should be doing or not doing?
because like I prefer like the knowing things like to have like detail a lot like
Yeah.
people know like stickers like
Yeah. So I think time management is key. Like, and that's a hard part. It was a hard part for me because I always feel like I have when making this cartoon, I had to cut things in half, and it was hard at first. Me and Mark had some heated conversations about that because it's really hard when you identify yourself with that skill, which was my case. To me, drawing was like me in my best qualities. And to think that I have to do less than the best, while this was a tool for acceptance for me, it was really hard. But it was more expressive. So I would say if you got good skill, try to find a simplified way that's going to save you time, but that's not the best argument. It was not the best argument for me. I'll speak from my perspective because everyone's different. The best argument was being able to do simpler allows for the essence to come out. The real stuff that you want to come out will come by trying to not use so many detail and go to what's really needed. It also makes it's easier to read. My cartoons used to be like so busy that you wouldn't know where to put your eye. And that's one of it's not a good thing. When you want to show that you're good too much, or when you have a pleasure of drawing, that's the other side. When you have a great pleasure in drawing and you want to fill up your square, well, you got to know that your eye has to start somewhere. And it has to be clear where the eye gets in. I studied fine arts in university, and that's one thing that we learned in painting is that any painting, if it's badly done, your eye is going to go away from it, just composition-wise. Your eye gets in because it's attracted to something. It has to be attracted to something. And then it gets around. That's the physical experience of watching a painting, is that your eyes get around, and there's nothing to bring you out of the drawing. Even if it's a Rothko, even if it's like just big squares of colors, it doesn't matter. Your eye wants to stick around. If there's things that are leading you, everything leads you outside of the canvas, then you're going to move on to the next one pretty quickly. So make sure that there's something happening, it's clear what's happening. You simplify your drawing to go to the essence, to the bare minimum that's needed to tell that story. And it's going to be the more powerful. As I said, like Schultz, all the cartoonists in general, they make simplified versions. And there's a power in that. But it takes, for me, it took like kicking my ego in the ass to be able to do that. It's my personal experience. So whoever likes drawing in here will have a different relationship to it. Yes?
Can I ask a question about, could you tell us what you learned in making Felix and Anya in this particular style as compared to
the other one?
making the finals of the
Okay.
comic?
You also the osteopath chapter in Felix and Anya when the dad goes to okay. That's a part of the other cartoon that we're making right now. There's a difference in style. These ones are way cleaner. I'm using ink. It takes longer. I find them beautiful, but they're a bit more stiff because I'm trying to make them really beautiful. With Felix and Anya, I try to make them efficient. And through efficiency, I actually showed a lot more of how I felt when I was doing it. It's a little less contrived. But that takes effort. The reason why it was heated conversations with Mark is because I knew it'd be super hard for me to do that. And I couldn't be asked just do it, it's easy. I was like, no, it's not easy. Actually, it takes a lot of drawing in your life to get to a point where you're able to do really simple and get the minimum, and it's beautiful. And to me, that was like asking me to become a master all at once. But then, I'm not saying I'm a master, but then having to do this cartoon helped me go that way. Simplify. You see in the first page, when Felix gets up and drinks his beer, when he's in his bedroom, it's like, that felt good. It was fun. It was very liberating for me, because what I learned, okay, I'll tell you how I learned drawing quickly. My uncle was a painter, and he learned like the classical way. And he saw me as his apprentice. And he was the driest person in the world, and he made me feel like drawing is going to be hell, and I have like a chain and bullet attached to my leg, and I have to be like an apprentice, like in the Middle Ages. So I learned to draw like, he showed me books with Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci drawings, and I had to reproduce them. That's how I learned to draw. And then I realized that's not me at all. I much prefer these guys. But I learned that. So my shading, I learned like, I can shade like straight lines, like one on top of the other, and that end is so loose and it's so much. But it's very contrived. It's one way that I learned. I had to break it down. And now doing what I did for Felix and Anya was like so liberating. Because it doesn't need to be that. That's why for me it's important.
Carlos, I don't know.
Yes?
You chose to draw Felix and Anya black and white.
Yeah.
But why did you choose that? Why didn't you choose book coloring?
Because there was time issues. So that's a very practical decision. But also, the drawings in black and white with the style that I use are expressive enough that I felt I didn't need to add the color. I did cartoons for a motorsport magazine for 14 years. I used to be a co-driver in rally racing. I grew up in car racing for some reason, because my dad was doing it. And so I was doing cartoons for that, professionally for that magazine, and I did them first black and white and then in color. And in retrospect, the black and whites were better. But it's nothing to say about the use of color. If you can use color in a smart way, you'll be fine. We tried color. We felt like it was as expressive, if not more, just in black and white. Yes?
Was there anyone else? No. So I'm just like keeping an eye on the time,
Yes,
and
thank you.
I realize I have a couple things I need to talk to them about, like after your presentation is over.
Yeah.
So is there anything like really important that you wanted to share that's sort of not written already in the notes that they're going to get?
Let me get to that. Okay, just one last thing. The frames and the gutters. You know, cartooning usually uses boxes to put the drawings in. Well, the size and the shape of those boxes are also telling the story. I usually work in film, so it's the same box that I use. With cartooning, there's a freedom of making a small one when you can make someone feel stuck because of your size. If your character is stuck in a situation, you can make a smaller box. Okay, so it can be very expressive. And the gutter, according to this guy, if you want to take note, he's the one where I learned the universal thing. I thought that simple drawings were just because you can draw well, and he's the guy who taught me, no, a simple drawing is universal, a complex drawing is singular. And you're not saying the same things with those two things. So the gutter, if you have someone coming out of his house with his head down, and the next drawing is, let's pick another example. You see someone with an axe. Okay, that's the example I use. You see someone with an axe, and there's a guy going like, oh my God. And then in the next drawing, you see a landscape of a city, and you see, written. Then your brain in the gutter like in between those drawings, that we say in the gutter, but it's in your head, you'll make the link between those two events. You'll imagine the guy getting smashed in the head and going, oh my God, this is awful. But he hasn't shown it to you. You did it as a reader. And that's one thing you can do. You don't have to show everything. Actually, it's better not to show everything. Decide what you want to show so that the reader can do part of the job. A good comic book or any good story lets the reader do part of the job. So make sure that you don't spread out everything. Leave some out so that the people can be like, I'm so smart. I understand what's happening between those two things. It feels good when you watch a movie and you're like, oh my God, it's totally what I understood. I'm so smart. You have to try to find ways. It's the hardest part. For me, it's the hardest part. But you have to find what to leave out. I do it instinctively. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. You gotta give it a try. It's almost done, eh? Time-wise? Is there anything else that you'll have to make a cartoon?
Sometimes we do like a checkout, so like I ask students what sticks out from the workshop, what sticks out, what new questions do you have, or what did you like?
What new things did you learn?
What new things did you learn?
Today.
Sticks out from today. What new questions? All right, so let's give Alain a little bit of like the things that you learned from today, or what sticks out, or new questions, because it's also really helpful for the teacher or the person there to get that kind of feedback that the talk was interesting, or you learned, or you didn't know this. So I learned a lot, but I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about you guys. Yeah.
That's very good to understand that simpler image, like the easiest is easier to like.
That's cool. Yeah.
Well, I learned the fruits and different like food products.
Yes.
I thought that was really cool because you sort of capture a lot of stereotypes as well with the body shapes. Like,
Yeah.
my two guys, one's a pear and one's a loaf of bread.
Cool.
So that was really cool to learn that, and it also helps simplify.
They are. Cool.
Yeah, so that's what I learned. It was really cool.
Awesome.
I learned that words like access the sort of rational thinking part of our brain of what we want to show to the world, but drawings access like the sort of hidden, deeper, more authentic self, so it can be a really good avenue to explore that.
Yeah, super useful.
Anyone else? Okay, so I'm just gonna need like a couple of minutes with them alone.
Yeah.
So if you could like wrap it up, and if you and Mark wanna wait